but again, want to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. This is a topic near and dear to my heart as someone who has had a lot of the jobs that we'll be talking about today, and as someone who feels really, really strongly about the importance of worker voice. I was really, really excited to hear about the project that our partners at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland and Sarah from Atlanta were working on, and I believe others. So really a topic that I think is very timely and some new perspectives on what's going on at the intersection of workers and work. On behalf of the Ohio Workforce Coalition, welcome. We have a couple members of our leadership committee. Welcome to them. I saw Jill and Lori McKnight. Appreciate their ongoing support of the work that we're doing. And if you are just joining us, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and add a question if you like. The Ohio Workforce Coalition offers monthly webinars, and we try to find topics that are of interest and relevance to our members and the community at large. We also try to push the envelope a bit and say, hey, we might not be talking about this particular topic, but we ought to be because it's important. And I think there's been lots of opportunity for that over the last few years in particular. Members of the coalition can join, well, you can join the coalition, but members can access recordings of our webinars on the members only section of our website. And you can follow the coalition on Twitter. You see the handle down there for as much longer as Twitter will be around, who knows? And then certainly can always reach out to me directly. I invite you to connect in on LinkedIn or via email or whatnot. This year, the coalition did launch a new membership opportunity, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, just a few words in a bit, but you can also read more about it at the link that Carter will drop into the chat. So as I mentioned, we do have a big group today, and so we ask you to stay on mute. You're welcome to stay on camera or stay on mute, but open your camera so we can see your smiling faces and get a read of the room. And with that, also invite you to put questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll get to you as we progress. So I think, Carter, let's go ahead and get started. So I think I've done a sufficient job of welcoming everyone. We're going to give you just a quick overview of the coalition, talk a bit about our latest report that's out, hear from the Worker Voice Project from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and then have ample time for questions and discussion. So the Ohio Workforce Coalition envisions a future when Ohioans have equitable access to opportunity and can actually take advantage of it because they have the supports they need, where Ohio businesses have access to a skilled workforce, but that workforce is actually advancing in good jobs, and where Ohio's workforce systems are aligned, transparent, inclusive, and accountable. That's not too much to ask, right? So our mission is to build and engage this multi-system stakeholder network. So you heard me comment a bit ago about the variety of different stakeholders that are represented just on this call, but then to also mobilize you all to develop policy priorities and advocate for the priorities we identify with local, state, and federal officials. We do spend most of our time on state policy, but recognize that you have to have the local grassroots conversations to be effective at the state policy level. And you really have to also understand what's going on at the federal level. We deploy several strategies to actually advance towards our mission. These are well represented on our website if you want to poke around there, but I gave you a couple examples. I'm recently super excited about new professional development and peer learning opportunities that we're bringing to the table, but also really the tools and research that we're trying to make available to our members so that as you're meeting with public officials, as you're talking about what's going on across the state, you've got data, you've got information to really help support the work that you're doing in the field. So Our policy priorities are typically organized around individuals, employers, and the workforce system. I won't read these verbatim, but wanted to at least have you going into hearing about when working isn't enough with the perspective of sort of this three-legged stool where you're looking at funding and the supports that individuals need, considering the quality of jobs and workplaces across the state of Ohio, and then really thinking about equitable access and the accountability that we want to see, better data in our public system so that as resources are being deployed, as decisions are being made, we know who is being impacted, who's benefiting from investments, and what the overall result of those investments are. So that is really where the impetus for the most recent report emerged out of, this idea that we need to better understand what's happening with work and with Ohio's high growth, high current openings, high projected openings, high current employment, occupations that still keep people poor. What are those jobs? What's going on there? And so we looked at 10 jobs high in one of those areas, and those areas are not made up by us. You know, those are typical data categories available through BLS. And we worked with the Center for Community Solutions. Emily Matillo, who is on the phone here today, was very patient working through what are the research questions, what can we tell, what don't we know, which is sometimes equally as important, and really dialed into these 10 jobs that warrant additional attention. The work was initially supported with a grant from the National Skills Coalition, and I think we might have a couple of them on with us today, and was really designed to explore the impacts of race in workforce systems and how might state policies advance racial equity. And so as we look at these occupations and look at the clustering that happens and look at public benefit receipts and public benefit receipts by race, really start getting to a better understanding of what's happening and for who in these jobs. So we're going to go through three to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from Sarah. The first job I've put up here is the job with the highest current employment of the jobs that we looked at. So you see 119,700 people currently working in food service, fast food, counter worker jobs in Ohio. This also has the lowest median income of all of the occupations we looked at just $9.27 an hour. And if you think about it, these are the workers that really bore the brunt of COVID. They deal with public dissatisfaction, and they earn in an hour what we're spending on the lattes and the cappuccinos that they are serving us. And even at the 90th percentile in this category, most fast food service counter workers with dependents are likely to qualify for public benefits. You know, I should add that some of this could be wage suppression as a function of having a workforce that skews younger. But if we want better jobs for our emerging workforce, we have to make those jobs better so that individuals in these positions can actually connect to career pathways, grow their skills, and over time have the headspace and resources they need to move into higher wage demand occupations. So from the perspective of food service workers, again, highest current employment of the jobs we looked at, with a high percentage of individuals in these jobs still being eligible for public benefits. I should flag also at the bottom there, you see that this occupation is, you do see overrepresentation from Black and brown workers, which is important as we think about overall wealth and earnings. Next up, we see the jobs with the highest number of openings. And I should note that this job, laborers, freight, and material movers, is also only second behind the fast food counter worker. I'm sorry, behind home health as current most highest projected growth occupations. And I think what we really wanted to look at within the manufacturing sector is we wanted to look at the manufacturing sector to really underscore the importance of manufacturing jobs, but also to flag that even with the significant investments that have been made across the state of Ohio in manufacturing jobs, in jobs that are widely believed to hold a lot of opportunity or believed to be really good jobs, there is still opportunity for improvement. And an example of that is that workers at the 10th percentile in this position still qualify for food support. And between 15 to 20% of Ohio's laborers, freight, and material movers receive Medicaid or SNAP benefits. And so as you think about career pathways, as you think about the starting point, recognizing that making those jobs better is a pathway to helping people actually advance into, again, the higher paying, more stable manufacturing jobs. And as I mentioned, with the scale of the investments that are going into the manufacturing sector as a whole, it's really important for us to consider these occupations, and we ought to be able to ensure that employers in this sector are not additionally subsidized by the public benefits supporting their workers. The third example I want to give you is probably the job that comes up most frequently as we think about jobs that are just really tough jobs, and that's home health aide. And this job's flagged frequently because of the numbers, the projected growth. These are the people who are caring for us. They're helping us shower. They help us eat. They help us die with dignity. And yet nearly half of home health aides are receiving Medicaid, and about a third are receiving food support. And so as we think of the individuals who are, really depending on us, who are working for government, sometimes private agents, or that we're really depending on rather, who are working for government, private agencies, sometimes even themselves as 1099s, really need to look at what we can do around home health aide jobs. It is common to hear, well, Medicaid reimbursements, we can't do anything about that. We don't have any control. We can't pay more because of all of these other complicated factors. And, I don't want to minimize the impact that external factors have on wages for that occupation, but I think it's time we all think about what else can we do to make jobs better. It's not just about the wages. It's about predictable scheduling. It's about how far does someone have to travel between clients when they're working as an aide. It's about what work environments are we willing to tolerate for them. And so thinking more comprehensively about what a good job looks like and what we can do with regard to some of the jobs that may have wage constraints that are out of our control. These jobs are not going away. They are not going to be automated en masse. And while we can address Medicaid reimbursements and funding, we really ought to be thinking about some of these other factors. And so our report overall, I think, leads to several broad brush conclusions that we'll be continuing to talk about. One is that job creation efforts are important, but so are efforts to improve existing jobs. We have heard a lot lately, certainly about Intel. This week, it's about the electric vehicle workforce plan that's being deployed. There is a lot of chatter about Ohio's job creation efforts. We need to make the jobs that are here better jobs so that people can prepare to continue to advance themselves. I think our report indicates that receiving public benefits, this notion that we need to cut benefits and get people off of benefits so they go back to work, is just not the reality of what's going on. People are working and still receiving public benefits because they are not working in jobs that they can afford to support their families on wages alone. We do need to reduce employer reliance. As you think about the numbers of people who are working in these occupations, they are getting publicly funded food supports, publicly funded healthcare. That is not even considering childcare and other public benefits that weigh into the picture. And so those employers really are benefiting from the public benefits that individuals are receiving. And how do we start balancing the conversation, so to speak? And then ultimately, we need better data about which public workforce investments are working and who they are working for. There are examples from that. I think you can look at a wide range of programs and sort of start, once you start disaggregating the data, or at least flag the data we don't have, we can really dig into and uncover what's going on with the investments that are being made at the state level. And so from the coalitions, our next steps really kind of connect with and align with the work that I articulated as our policy priorities. We are going to be releasing a follow-on to this report that outlines the impact of race and occupational clustering in these occupations when it comes to public benefit receipt, and exploring a bit, not just around clustering with benefit receipt, but what does it mean to have, what impacts does race have when it comes to what resources people have access to and how they're able to support themselves and their families. We want to highlight Ohio's quality employers. There are employers investing in their workforce, investing in their workers, trying to figure out this new relationship between worker voice and employer needs. And we want to highlight them. We want to share what they're doing, spread those learnings across the state, and really look at how we can incent economic development partners to focus on attracting and creating good jobs. And then we want to explore Ohio's and plan to explore Ohio's major workforce investments. I'll flag particularly tech cred because we are going through some tech cred data right now to better understand where is that money going, who is it benefiting, and how can we make sure that those more discretionary state dollars are benefiting frontline workers and specifically going to benefit workers equitably and not benefiting one set of workers over another. So we are going to talk more and have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end of Sarah's presentation, but I am very excited to follow my comments with comments from Sarah Miller, who's principal advisor for community and economic development within the Atlanta Fed's Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity. If you don't follow them on social media and engage with them, you should, because there is constantly really, really good information coming out of that department. Prior to her time at the bank, Sarah was with the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning for 10 years. CALE is a national nonprofit, and Sarah helped develop and grow the workforce and economic development area of service at CALE. Through her current and prior roles, she's conducted research and provided direct engagement on effective workforce and labor market investments, occupational and career pathway work, and workforce and labor market strategies that aim to address long-term economic mobility and resilience for the community and the workers and learners within it. Sarah mentioned before some of you joined that she is an Ohio native, so it's very special to bring Ohioans back, even though she's in Atlanta now. She did grow up in Toledo, is a graduate and earned a graduate of Bowling Green, where she earned her Bachelor of Science degree in education. And I have been following Sarah's work for several years now, and I'm just glad to have her here. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. And it's been a pleasure working with you over the years and to be back, like I said, with all my Ohio friends. And was fascinated by the analysis that you all just shared. Curious, I'm waiting with bated breath for some of these great stories about your high road employer or Ohio employers. We need to tell those stories. The more that employers are talking about the value that they're getting out of their investment and what it took to do things differently, that's going to be the spark that, we'll see some market change. So I'll look forward to that. But and thanks for that introduction. Every time I hear my bio read, I'm like, I need to edit that so much down. So it's just short and sweet. I don't know if anyone else I get secondhand embarrassment for myself with that, but thank you so much. So I'm going to take you all through some research that just came out last month that represents a full Federal Reserve System effort. So I was able to lead this work with my colleague in Philly, but we worked very closely with your colleagues in Cleveland. If you all have worked with Kyle Fee or Marissa Piazza, you know that they are absolutely fantastic human beings. We're blessed to have them. I'm blessed to call them colleagues, and I hope we all benefit from the research and the work that they lead in your footprint. But this is a national effort. Our objective was really to understand the perspectives of workers and job seekers so that we could get some detail on the why behind the what in the labor market trends and the data that we were seeing. We started having these conversations in 2021 when the national conversation was, why aren't workers coming back? Unemployment was too much, stimulus was too much, it was a disincentive for people to come back to work. What's really going on here? Is it a great resignation? Is it a great reshuffling? You all recall the constant and relentless kind of national headlines in that. Inside of that, though, we didn't really see much that was coming out that was talking with these workers that experience far more instability and were negatively affected by economic shocks far more than the other workers that would have typically fallen into this great resignation, the category of worker. So we said, well, let's just talk with them. So what we did was that we reached out through community partners that we had. So towards employment, I see you're on the call. In our Cleveland session that we did, we had people from Ohio Means Jobs, from Toward Employment, Cincinnati Works, Perscolis, Community Action. So we had reached out to folks like you to say, these are the kinds of conversations that we want to have. We want to explicitly talk with workers that don't have a bachelor's degree, since that has remained kind of the massive safety net in terms of employability long-term, and especially in economic shocks like the pandemic presented, to reach out to these participants. So we chose to conduct focus groups. That was our modality so that we could get as wide of a range of folks on the call and lower the intimidation bar as much as possible. We started having these conversations in May of last year, still not necessarily feeling that confident of going into buildings. I wasn't even fully back into an office at that point. So being virtual really worked out for us so that we could have kind of an intimate space where they could join from their own homes. We had conversations after hours to make it easier for those that were working during traditional working hours to join, and ultimately ended up hosting 20 focus groups, one of which was a pilot that helped us to kind of refine our questions and our approach, 3 of which were focused on specific topics. We did one conversation that was exclusively with rural participants, one that was around job quality. What did that mean? I'll talk about that in more detail, but obviously job quality became a forefront aspect of the conversation. And we also did one around inflationary pressures and wages, because, at this time last year, we were looking at inflation rates that were about double what they are right now. So that was kind of our total scope. We ultimately talked with 175 participants. They covered 33 states and 147 zip codes, so fairly representative, and a really good mix between male, female, race, caregiver, non-caregiver, and other barriers to employment, whether that was they were a new citizen, they were undocumented, they were justice involved, mental health, drug abuse, those types of issues as well. So it was a pretty good mix. But if we want to go on to the next slide, if you've seen the report, please, I encourage you to take a look at it. We have on that link the executive summary, the full report, and the full methodology so that you can get a full peek behind the curtain of all the things that we did. But we really tried to not just figuratively, but literally center worker perspectives and worker voice throughout the report. And things like this were heard by many participants. I've been laid off so many times over the past couple of years. I wanted to join because of the title, the worker's voice. It makes me think that we have a voice because normally we're not heard. And I felt the urge to share my experience. So I would just say before we move on to the next slide that, that was a real question that we had before we entered into this work. Are people going to be willing to talk to us? Is it scary for the Federal Reserve to be asking these questions? Are they going to be willing to be candid? And I will say unequivocally, those concerns went right out the window our first call. They are ready to share their experiences. And they were incredibly candid. They were incredibly thoughtful, open, sharing some really raw experiences and talking about what was direly needed for them to even make ends meet. So if any of you all are working to have some of these conversations locally, and that's that's a shimmer of a concern that you may have, wipe that away right now. They are more than willing to show up at a table to talk very explicitly about their experiences. But if we want to move on to the next slide, we'll give you a little sense of like our general kind of research questions here. So we wanted to understand, I would say the only other inclusion criteria that we had for our sample was that we wanted to talk with workers that were between the ages of 20 and 55. And I'll explain that. We had a time horizon aspect to our set of questions. We wanted to understand what happened at the onset of the pandemic, especially, Rebecca, even as you had mentioned, a lot of these frontline workers bore the brunt of what was going on at the onset of the pandemic. They didn't have the luxury of being able to work from home. There was a lot of precarity in whether or not their job was even going to be there. Were they going to be laid off? All of these different things. So we wanted a reasonable assumption that someone at the onset of the pandemic was employed or actively seeking work. So wanted to talk with folks that were 20 at the youngest, and then our ceiling was 55, recognizing that there's a very different set of kind of challenges for older workers, and wanted to really just focus in on that kind of prime age category there. So we wanted to understand their experiences at the onset, what happened during recovery, how did that affect the way that you engage with employment in the labor market now? Were they benefiting from the strong labor market? So, a year ago was when we had initially hit unemployment that was a 50-year low. There was two jobs for every one job seeker. Wages were rising at pretty significant pace, even for the lowest kind of quintile in the workforce. So are you better off now? We wanted to better understand that. And then, of course, what are these persistent barriers that may have been exacerbated by the pandemic that may be preventing you from returning to the labor market? And then what are you doing to better your employment opportunities? So how are you, are you changing your expectations? You're trying to get different kinds of jobs? Are you pursuing training? Are you, working with the employment case manager, kind of things like that. So generally speaking, those were kind of the focus of our questions and our kind of semi-structured facilitation guide, which a full copy of that is in the details of the report. If we want to go to the next slide, here are our top 4 main findings. And I will caveat this with saying we have 25 hours worth of data that we were calling through to be able to get to these kind of main findings. This is just our initial report. We have future work coming out that I'll talk about at the end, that's going to do a deeper dive on certain topics, certain issues that came up in these major findings. But these findings were generally representative of all of the conversations that we had through the 20 focus groups. So the first being that, at the onset of the pandemic, the complex nature of these decisions they were making on a day-to-day basis, and in some cases on an hour-to-hour basis, about balancing health risks to them and their families, dealing with their family demands, weighing, do I risk my health and my family's health over having income, or is not having income more of a danger to my family than the risk that I'm putting myself in, kind of viral transmission and things like that. Those were so traumatic and scary of experiences that it fundamentally changed how they talked about how they were navigating the labor market. It was scary in the moment. Now everything is calmed down and I'm back to kind of acting how I did pre-2020. Absolutely not. These experiences were scarring to how they then engaged in the job market. Our second finding is probably the most counterintuitive. The tight labor market was not really benefiting all of these workers equally. They had quite a bit of challenges, even finding jobs. We'll talk about that in more detail, but referencing sending out hundreds of applications and not hearing anything back. We can talk what that means around the skills-based hiring component of this and what we saw businesses doing that didn't necessarily fully trickle down to the benefit of these workers in particular. And the stresses that the labor shortage put on those workers that remained in the workforce, taking on 2 to 3 additional full-time job expectations of tasks with no increase in their compensation. That has a lot of stress financially, physically, and mentally on the workers, and they talk in quite a bit of detail about that. Our third is around job quality. And our objective here is not to lay out an additional framework. It's just we're trying to uplift how workers themselves talked about what quality meant to them. And again, we'll talk about that a little more, but Rebecca, you teed it up perfectly. It's not just about wages, though wages are a critical component of this. So much of their discussion was around, I just lack dignity. There's no respect. I have no agency or autonomy over my life, and I don't want that. That if I can find a job that gives me those qualities, I'm willing to, be a little more flexible on the wages than I would be otherwise. So it's a lot of these, just more generally, how do you treat people? What does that mean for frontline managers? What does that mean for the businesses that you work with? These are non-compensatory factors. Flexibility in schedule or consistency in schedule. Having wages that are correlated to their responsibilities, etc. And then finally, workers are reinventing themselves left and right. Now, I will caveat this by saying that our sample was obviously slightly biased because we were working through organizations like those that you represent today. So we know that those workers were more connected to employment services, to job training, to skills training programs, but they are using traditional and non-traditional ways of investing in themselves. We heard plenty of workers talking about how they're utilizing YouTube, Reddit, and other channels like that to learn coding, to be content creators. I mean, they're learning how to do these things that they can piece together income from a number of different places, ultimately to change their economic opportunity, but really just to find something that's stable and that gives them some autonomy over their working lives. So I'll talk in a little more detail in each of these slides. And I see that there's some comments coming in through the chat. I'll pause throughout. I'm also more than willing, if y'all want to raise your hand, we can stop and ask questions, kind of things like that. But this just will go into a little bit more detail into each of these 4 major findings. So as I mentioned, these 2, I would say, the onset of the pandemic and their experiences in the quote unquote hot labor market are those kind of foundational and kind of causal experiences that affected then how they're navigating the job market. But when people were talking about their health and safety concerns, caregiving demands, the strain on their mental health, literally, am I going to be able to provide for my child? If I don't work, I don't eat. And if I don't eat, my child doesn't eat. Or I can't go to work. I live with highly compromised a multi-generational family. I don't want to bring anything back, and it's not worth it to me for the risk of getting money. Like the words traumatic, scary, scarring, those are words that they're using about this experience and how profoundly it affected the way that they're actively engaging in the labor market. So you'll see within this section of the report, we talk a lot about, these roles that had high job insecurity and high financial precarity. I'm just waiting to be laid off. Am I going to be the next one? There were layoffs and layoffs and layoffs. And then finally it was my turn. They were just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop in these instances, which has all of this kind of negative effect on your mental and physical health. Obviously the health and safety concerns, many people in these frontline roles felt that they were put in this very awkward and complicated place of being an enforcer of public, policy, or that they felt that they couldn't express their own needs for safety because that wasn't the culture on the floor. There was someone that was talking about being in food production, that if I came in wearing a mask, I was bullied by my supervisor and by other staff because that just wasn't how they approach things. Other people in food service, frontline food service, you know, all the things that we saw, being accosted by customers, having to keep up with ever-changing health policies, all of that took its toll and increased their mental stress. And of course, all of these barriers that existed before the pandemic, access to childcare, access to transportation when routes were significantly reduced or eliminated altogether, that completely narrowed their possibility of where they could even work at all. And I'm in Atlanta now, and I'll say, you know, in the city, but then you go out to Cobb County, there's a lot of investment out there. And someone in Atlanta said, if the job's in Cobb County, it may as well be in Wyoming. I can't get there. It doesn't matter, that it's just right there. There's no transportation that's reliable enough for me to get my child to where they need to be taken care of to get me there on time. So if we want to go to the next slide. So here's just a really illustrative quote there. You know, it wasn't easy. It was very challenging. I was concerned for my child and the health of my child. I was scared that I might be able to, that I could lose my job and that I wouldn't be able to provide the necessary means for my children. So very tough, very challenging moment. Can we go on to the next slide? So the labor market disparities, I want to hang on this for just a second, because this, I'll give you a little bit, you know, kind of behind the curtain here. This was a question that we had to refine and check our bias. We went into the question saying, oh, it's great. The data says it's great. So how are you experiencing the greatness and what's happening? And they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. I can see that job descriptions had been stripped of, you know, education requirements, certain years of experience, but I'm still sending all of these applications out. I'm not hearing anything back. If I am hearing something back, I'm told that I'm not qualified for the job because I don't have these qualifications that were recently stripped from the job description. And there's a quote within the report where someone says, yeah, I can see that they've removed the credential requirement for this. All of the job tasks have stayed the same, but they've reduced the salary by $2 an hour. So it's no longer attractive to me. I can't pursue that job. So, you know, in a moment where we saw that there was a lot of investment in skills-based practices, I think what this signals to us is, number one, that the workforce system playing that broker role, if y'all were more funded, there would be more support there to be able to have these conversations, of course, but also that I think there's way more time and investment that needs to be had on the demand side of this equation, really to make skills-based practices work in reality. Hiring is a highly human behavior. It's one thing to reduce qualifications on a job description. It's quite another thing for that to actually connect with a hiring manager, to help you in interviewing these workers and seeing how their past experiences connect to what you would need them to do in this role, et cetera. And then a significant amount of discussion was really around what those labor shortages meant in terms of the burnout that they were experiencing. And you'll see in the report, I mean, they're talking about, I was on the verge of a breakdown. I physically can't handle this anymore. I'm taking on way too much responsibilities, and a lot that they didn't feel empowered to ask for more money. They were certainly not given, you know, an increase in their compensation relative to the addition of responsibilities that they were taking on. But that kind of, you know, connects to our next point around the job quality. But if we want to move to the next slide, I think this is a really powerful quote. And we have several like this. I mean, we try to be representative in the report. This is just one of many that we heard, that they've been sending out 80 to 100 applications and have not been able to find a job. I've been pulled in for interviews, but not selected because I'm not what they're looking for. Now, many were talking about how they sent applications out and heard absolutely nothing. This connects with other research that my colleagues in the Federal Reserve of Minneapolis have done as well. So this is corroborated insight that it wasn't just a small sample. Now, I will say we didn't necessarily ask, what's the job that you're applying for? Is it in a completely different sector? Is it a completely different career pathway? Is it a total leap for you? But we do have people that are talking about, I have experience in this area, 10 years plus, and I'm still not hearing anything back. So this is, you know, one of our most, I would say, kind of counterintuitive findings from what the data alone, the faceless, humanless data was telling us at the time. So expectations for job quality. This is super nuanced, and I would say that in our first kind of double click and our deep dive that's going to cut much deeper into the data on this particular topic is on job quality. That should be out, I would say, probably sometime in August, early to mid-August. So please do keep a look. The link that Carter shared on Fed community site, that will be our landing page where everything will be listed there as it comes out. But they painted a really kind of complex and varied picture. Now, they absolutely talked about wages, but I would say very seldomly was wage and wage alone a factor of what job quality meant in their own words. They're talking about wanting agency, dignity, just general respect and autonomy over their work. They want stable employment. I mean, that was kind of a baseline. I want something that I know is going to be there, that I can plan, you know, longer term around my finances and my household budgets. I want to know that I may have a job today, I may not have a job tomorrow. Obviously, wages that are correlated to compensation or correlated to their work responsibilities is paramount. Being empowered to ask for money that they deserve, given the responsibilities that they're taking on. And that flexibility and work-life balance. You know, as many of us, I'm sure, as I can see, a lot of us are still working from home, and I work from home most of the time. I love that we can do that now. I love the flexibility that that provides in my life. And a lot of people experienced versions of that during the pandemic and could see, oh, I get to spend time with my children and I can still do this. I'm not going to go back and work myself to the bone and sacrifice all of this time with my family just because you said so. And just because this is, you know, we don't want to revert back. You know, those were kind of the tenor of the conversations that we had. We want to go to the next slide. And I know I'm running late, so I'm going to close up really quick. So here, I thought this was a perfect quote. This is the point of our job quality. It's no longer an aspiration, it's an expectation. They were saying before, okay, fine, I'll deal with what I deal with, what you give me. But now, no, I want these benefits. I want these hours. I need the schedule. Now you need us just as much as we need you. And we know that, and I'm going to stand up for myself. Now, there was a mix between those that were kind of drawing the line in the sand and had found that own internal empowerment towards others that were saying, I'm afraid to ask for more money. I don't want to be fired. And, you know, especially those comments coming from people that had other barriers to success. We want to go to the next slide. And then finally, as you all know, workers are actively investing in their skills. This is not a matter of I'm complacent, I don't need the skills. They are actively in a number of different ways, self-directed, formal, informal, online, in person, through programs like you're offering, through, you know, just working with other people that they know in their lives and becoming kind of informal apprentices. They're doing this left, right, and center. Much of it was to really get to a better employment opportunity, largely that offered them more autonomy, whether that was, I'm going to have my own business, I'll be a sole proprietorship. But most of them were talking about, I need to be mobile right now. I need to move to a better job now so that I can have that stability long-term. And then if we move to the next slide, you see this, people were trying to transition into to tech fields. You know, they want to do this. They want to be able to work remotely. They feel like there's more job security in some of those areas. So, you know, they've been taking tutorials. It hasn't been easy. This particular participant was still working full time, but they're pushing through. You know, these are all things that you all know because this is the reality of the participants that you're serving every day. But we think that this is really powerful to put out there, that this isn't a matter of complacency. This is a matter of, I am trying to find something that's going to be recession proof. I'm trying to find something that's going to offer me livable wages for myself and my family, and I'm investing in myself to get there. If we go to the next, so let me stop here because I think that Carter is going to share the slides, because I know there's been chatter in here and I want to be able to answer questions, or we can have kind of an open discussion. But in general, you know, we want to understand if these trends are cyclical or structural. The qualitative research really does give us some human elements and some reality to what the data is showing us in some cases, but is not showing us in a lot of cases. So we hope that, we've been able to show the value of qualitative research, especially to an institution like the Federal Reserve where I sit, but also to you all as well. And then on the last slide, you'll see, if you go to the next one, this is just as you're talking with other, what's the value to employers? What's the value to workforce, your service providers like yourself, policymakers and researchers. So as you share this, these are some of the ways that we hope that can gin up conversations. But I'll pause there because I know that there's a
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to start off by way of discussion with flagging this conversation about where do wages fit. And, as you mentioned, Sarah, I flagged that wages are not the only consideration. And I just want to be clear, from my perspective, that doesn't mean that we don't have to keep fighting for better wages. It's not an either or. There are multiple different advocacy opportunities, and some are going to resonate differently. Some are going to be a little bit easier. I think one of the interesting pieces around wage increases during the pandemic is some of them went away. You had those temporary hazard pay. So what can we institute and codify during this time of evolving labor market and labor relationships so that we can continue to benefit from the worker voice that we're hearing now. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I saw someone put in the comment that we can keep fighting for better wages, and I absolutely that needs to be part of it. It's just not the only part, and I think it is a quick way. It's an easy box to check while we're paying more and we're still not getting people. And I have heard of employers saying that. And the reality is you could pay a lot and have a crappy work environment and you're still not going to get the right talent these days. So anything to add to that, Sarah?
Yeah, so I would say just on the, some of those benefits that have expired, I mean, those were some of the conversations that kicked off why we wanted to do this, because, we didn't want to we didn't want to hear that it was too much money and it disincentivized people from working. So we asked that direct question, and absolutely not. I mean, it provided a welcomed financial smoothing effect to their reality at the time, but they knew that it wasn't there forever. It gave them a chance to just literally catch their breath in many cases for the first time in their working lives, but it was not a disincentive to work. But I do think that I want this to allow for conversations that you can say, hey, we're seeing that there's all of these non-compensatory factors that are keeping people from wanting to take the job or from staying in the job. These are things that we should be working on. Employers should actively be engaging with their workforce. What is it that you need? How can how can we create a better working culture for you, or just environment through which that you can have your life work while we're also accomplishing what we need to accomplish in the role. But I also, from the burnout perspective, from paying people, according to what they're putting in, and this mismatch on connecting with job opportunities. That I think is really of the moment. We know that there's been some investment on the demand side to change those practices. A lot more work is there to do, which they will say themselves. I'm not being critical of the good actors that we see that are trying to invest this way, but that's where I think, the roles in which you all sit and partners within your spheres of influence can really help them to understand what does it mean to rethink our hiring process, our application tracking system, our protocols that we have for our hiring managers, what we should be looking for on a job application or a resume that's going to signal to me that there's competency short of 10 plus years of experience in a degree or a credential. That I really think is a way that we can use this to drive some conversation and to show they're actively investing in themselves. They want to get to these jobs. So if you're going to invest in them, that's another aspect of a quality employer that many talked about. So yeah, it's a completely variable approach. It's not just one solution.
Absolutely. So we have a question for you, Sarah. Any opinion of the four-day work week standard, the bill proposed by Mark Twain of California?
Well, I mean, on a personal note, I would love that. Yeah, I think what we need to be, careful therefore is what is that doing for workers that don't even have the benefit of a traditional 5-day work week right now?
Right.
So I don't, what is it solving for that section of the workforce? Because those are these workers that are more likely going to be reliant on the social safety net, that are more likely in kind of low minimum, barely minimum wage roles. Are we reducing the need for them to even be in their jobs for enough hours to get enough wages to cover their cost of living? So, I haven't looked exactly at this particular bill, but those are the things that I think about. It's sure it will benefit me and it will benefit a lot of us that work more in kind of the knowledge and thought leadership economy, but what is it doing for everyone else? Because that is a majority of our workforce. And I wouldn't want there to be any unintended and negative consequences to that in their livelihoods.
I think that it's also an example of how different expectations and needs and practice really are across sectors. And when we start really interfacing with businesses and trying to figure out what employers can do and what they need, it gets back to the starting point is talking to your workers.
Yeah.
You hearing from your workers, understanding what is going to make a difference for them. It may be a 4-day work week. It may be an emergency fund that they could rely on if something were to happen. It may be investments, different sorts of investments in more traditional benefits. So I think what we have as workforce practitioners and as workforce professionals have to do is really get out there and talk to our employers and our workers and ask those difficult questions and be willing to challenge current systems and say we need to do things differently. And JFF's represented on the call. They're running some job quality academies. There is a workforce leadership academy in Cleveland running that's really starting to think about how do these systems need to be set up differently. And top of mind for everyone is really recognizing that worker voice has to be at the middle of it and that there are good employers out there, and we don't need every employer. We don't need, the big ones, the major ones. We need a coalition of the willing and to make change there and to highlight that and build on that. And so again, just to build on what Sarah was saying, it may be a 4-day work week. It may be something else. It's probably going to be different in each community and by sector and by worker.
And also just to let you know, so I'm working as well with a WorkRise through Urban and the New Growth Innovation Network. So if anyone's on the call from the Fund for Our Economic Future in Cleveland, so that the focus of that is to bring workforce and economic development together. How do you center worker voice in those conversations? Because what I think would be great is also to bring this into the economic development field.
Yep.
As we're giving incentives to these businesses, as we're pulling them in, as we're giving them significant tax breaks and structuring all of this, there needs to be some expectation of quality jobs, quality work, quality pay, just kind of ethical practices. And not all of those jobs are good jobs, and pulling in kind of the when we go elephant hunting and economic development, what are the jobs that we're actually getting? Is that creating a true economic uplift effect for our community, and especially the people in our community that are not in those high mobile, high quality jobs to begin with?
So I will bring us home today since it's 1:59, and also encourage all of us to look at our own spheres of influence and the jobs that we hire for and where we live as practitioners, and as maybe providers or folks, boots on the ground doing the work? What does it mean for the workforce field? What do good jobs look like for workforce practitioners? And how do we each, carry that forward and encourage, those of you who are, or those of us who are working at that knowledge think tank strategy level, really hearing from the folks who are in the field. Mary Ellen, who's been in connected to the coalition for a long, long time and is talking to people every day. How do we connect with them and make sure that we're shrinking the gap between sort of the people who have the luxury of consulting and thinking and coming up with nice reports and the folks who are executing and living the reality on the ground? So come back for more conversations about these sorts of issues. Please follow us, feel free to reach out. If you've got a webinar idea, shoot it my way. Lots of conversations. We want to do something soon about some innovative things happening at the workforce board level. We've got some ideas around apprenticeship, and thank you all very, very much for being here. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today, and we'll look forward to the next iteration of your work. And I hope everyone will also look forward to the next iteration of our work. Thank you again. Take good care, everyone.